Hello and welcome to the CYF Course. We continue today with the series on spiritual parenting. We've seen in the first session that God has designed our life so we can grow in maturity. And we've seen this passage in 1 John where there are 3 stages of maturity that are described: the little children, the young men and young women, and the fathers and mothers. And this is important that we grow towards spiritual parenthood. We are called to become spiritual parents. Young people in fire is great, but it's not an end in itself. It's a good stage. And I hope the fathers and mothers in the Lord can still be on fire for God. So if we look around us in biological families, we see that God's plan to make children grow in maturity is to give them parents. Usually there are 2 parents if everything goes fine, sometimes 1, sometimes no parents, but the children are in orphanage. So parents usually they are a little bit more mature than their children. And because they have more maturity, they will set boundaries and will help the children to grow towards maturity. They are like a crane who lift up the children above their immaturity and help them go towards maturity. And actually, parents cannot have 50 children. Otherwise, the relationships are too distant. To be a real parent or a spiritual parent is the same, is to really have intimacy and to have a real connection of heart with the person. And sometimes I go in a church and I ask, who are the spiritual parents in the church? And people show me the pastor and his wife. And there are maybe 80% in the church. And I say, so there are 2 parents for 80 people. Wow, it's not really a family, it's an orphanage. So we need actually, if we want to see people grow in maturity in our base, in our church, in our ministry, to multiply spiritual parents at all levels of the community until the whole community is covered. And then the cup can overflow toward the outside and we can parent other people outside. Because we grow in maturity through continued, accountable and intimate relationships, not through programs. And I had to experience a revolution in that for myself. So when we speak about starting to parent people, don't give yourself the title of father or mother. Jesus warned us about that. You exercise the function of a father. You father the person because you pour out your heart into the person. But don't call yourself a father. The goal is discipleship. It's relationship. It's accountability, but not control. And this aspect has been abused in the 70s through the shepherding movements, for instance, where people could not take any decision without referring first to their mentor, to their guru, to their father. So we need to be very careful how we handle that. There are principles that we need to extract from this aspect, but be careful not to create a hierarchy and a dependency with that. And do not start to create a lot of artificial relationship. Use existing relationship channels. Who are the persons the Lord has already entrusted you with? Who are the persons the Lord already put on your heart? So invest in what is already here. The goal is for you to have more understanding on how you can help people grow towards maturity. How do we become spiritual parents? There are 2 ways, like in the natural world. You can become spiritual parents through birth. Paul was speaking about Onesimus in the letter to Philemon, my child that I birthed in the chains. He considered Onesimus that he brought to the Lord as his child. And he brought himself to this new birth. So he was spiritually his child. But you can also adopt a child that you have not brought to the Lord by yourself. Paul took Timothy like that. He was like an adopted child for him. And Timothy first was discipled by his mother and grandmother in the Holy Scriptures. But at one point, Paul brought him under his wings, and he brought him in his travels, and he started to invest in his life. Actually, we become parents when we have a child, whether you are ready or not. Actually, you are never ready to be parent. I remember when my wife was pregnant of our first child, I felt I was not ready. I told my wife, could you keep the child for a few more weeks, even months? I'm not ready. But you know, when the child is here, suddenly you do it. Because it's given, it's a grace that comes when the situation is needed. I remember telling my wife, I can cuddle her because our first child was a daughter. I can take care of her, but you know all the pees and the poos. I don't want to care for that. I'm disgusted with that. And then one day, when our daughter was maybe a few weeks, my wife, she left for 2 or 3 hours, and I was in charge of the baby. And as soon as my wife left the house, I heard a noise and a smell was filling the room. And I thought, oh no. And I remembered what I said. I don't want to change her. I don't want to deal with her diapers and to deal with the poos and the pees. But what should I do here? Should I let my daughter in her poo for 2 or 3 hours because I just don't want to do it? So I took my courage, I opened the little gift and I changed the diaper. And I did something I thought I would not be able to do, but it's a given grace. When the need is here, when it's your child, God gives the grace. And you know, in the spiritual world, the spiritual generations can be closer than the physical generations. I remember being in a house church movement in France, and one of the leaders came to me and he said, Ogi, come with me. I will introduce you to this person. She's like my child. I brought her to the Lord 20 years ago. And here is my grandchild. My spiritual daughter brought her to the Lord 18 years ago. And this is my grandchild. My spiritual grandchild brought her to the Lord 12 years ago. And there was like a chain with 6 or 7 generations over 20 years. And that's very impressive. And for me, I had to go through a spiritual conversion. Because for me, and I will explain you in the next session why, close relationships were difficult. So to train people, I focused on a good program. I wanted the best speakers on every theme I could find. I wanted the best worship. I wanted everything to be the best. And if the program is good, I thought the disciples will be good. So in my life, I have not been really a father for many years. I did not understand this principle of spiritual parenting. I loved actually projects more than people. I loved visions more than people. To preach and teach even to hundreds and thousands of people, yes. But a close fathering relationship, no. It made me afraid. So often on the road I have abandoned my spiritual children, the one who were looking at me as a reference, as an example. I just went to the next vision and let them on the side of the road. The goal of spiritual parenting is the maturity and sending forth of our children, because we do not train them for ourselves, so they can serve our own visions. We raise them up so we can send them and we can give them. This is the model that we have at creation. God gave Adam a wife. And after they will have children. And at one point, man shall leave his father and mother, and he will start his own family. He doesn't stay to serve the parents. So we need to be sending stations. We not keep the best people for ourselves, and if some of them want to leave, it's okay. But we want to send the best. And if we give the best we have, God will take care of what we carry on our hearts. We are all called to become parents, spiritual parents. And even if you are barren, if you cannot have children physically, You can have many children spiritually. You can still be a mother. You can still be a father. And actually, to become parents is a kind of death. I remember when I was single, I used to live my life the way I wanted. I could be very active in something. After I can take two days where I sleep the whole day, I eat anything, I don't cook. I just deal with my life the way I want. Then I got married. And I realized that I could not do that anymore because there is another person and I want the best for her. So it restricted my freedom. And then we had a child, and then a second child, and then a third child. And I felt, I had this image coming when I prayed, I felt like an earplug that was pressed and pressed and pressed. And I was even unable to find my original shape anymore. I felt restrained. I felt like a kind of death. But this death is precious because you die to yourself. And you know the scripture in John 12, verse 24. Unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies. What is the rest of the verse? Many people tell me he doesn't bear fruits. That's right. But there is something in between. Unless a kernel of wheat is planted in the soil and dies, it remains alone. And this is the challenge. People who don't want to die, who want to keep their comfort, their freedom. It's great when you are young, but little by little, you're 40, you're 50, you're 60, and you find yourself alone because you've been living for yourself until this point, and now nobody's here to take care of you. You remain alone. So there is no life without death. And becoming spiritual parents is also a kind of death. You die to some of your time, to some of your energy. Your spiritual children can call you in the middle of the night and you listen because you love them and you want them to grow. In Genesis 30, verse 1 to 3, it is written, when Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God, who has kept you from having children?" Then she said, "Here is Bilhah, my servant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and two can build a family through her." This is a very moving passage with Rachel, who wants to have children. And I see that this desire to have children needs to grow again in this generation, especially in the Western world. The number of children per family has been reducing in the last 50 years. And now in Europe, the renewing of the population is not enough. And it's because of immigration that Europe can keep her population. So it's important. And there is also a challenge of sterility. It seems that more and more parents are unable to have children. And sometimes there is a sterility by choice, because many people don't want to have children. They don't want to sacrifice their career. They don't want to sacrifice their freedom. So finding again the desire to become parent is a real challenge. And it's also real in the spiritual aspect. In the church, in the family, I pray to see more and more people 40, 50, 60 years old who have a heart for the young people, who invite them to eat once a week, who get interested in their life, who invest in their life, who pray for them. The young people, they need that actually. And I really challenge you. Dr. Edward Hendricks from Dallas Theological Seminary said, "We start to grow when we take the responsibility to make someone else grow." So when you enter the stage of spiritual parenthood, this is when you take the responsibility to make someone else grow. And this is out of your hands. because growth is a desire and a decision from the heart of the person. But you can stimulate, you can create an environment that will stimulate and foster growth. And you know, growth is not a question of age. You can be spiritual parents at 20 years old, and you can be a spiritual baby at 60 years old. So I challenge you, continue your growth in maturity and tend to become spiritual parents, because this is where God wants to lead us. And this is what this generation, this fatherless generation, as we tend to say, needs to help it grow into its full destiny. Let's have now, as usual, a few questions that we can take together to talk and process about this teaching. This is a very important teaching, and this is very challenging. How comes family is the best context for training, actually? What does it mean for our churches, our bases, our ministries? How can spiritual parenting be abused and used as a means to control and dominate people? And how to avoid it? Please share about this aspect of becoming parents as a kind of death. And share about this affirmation: we start to grow when we take the responsibility to make someone else grow. May the Lord bless you.